Good morning, everyone. Go ahead and take your seats. We'll go ahead and get started. If you haven't yet, members of the public, you can sign up over by the computer for public comment when we get to that section. But I am Councilmember Dustin Hillis. I'm chair of the Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee, and also the author of the paper we're having the work session on this morning. I've been joined by my colleagues to my right, our Vice Chair of the Public Safety Committee, Councilmember Byron Amos, and to my left, Councilmember Mary Norwood, who is also a member of the Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee. So just to provide a quick overview, the legislation is 22-0-1356. I'm the author and the sponsor, but it is co-sponsored by 13 of my colleagues, and thankful for that. There were some issues that came up when this made it to committee the first time. A lot of that was unfortunately misinformation. But so we scheduled this work session to dive a little deeper into this paper, and also to hear from the interested parties, our solicitor's office and our police department. So basically, last year, the city council, last term, we strengthened our nuisance code quite a bit. Solicitor Carter can talk more about that and their successes there. We wanted to go a step further and look to do what some other cities have done. One example is Baltimore. They have what is called a padlock law. This is somewhat like a padlock law in that it adds the remedy of closing specifically to the nuisance code. However, and another city is Chicago. Their padlock law is much more strict. We are not seeking to go that far. However, the one thing that is different from a usual padlock law is most padlock ordinances, they go to the police chief as the hearing officer. We cannot do that quite yet in the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia, because of state law, but I am actively working with state legislators to look into that. Instead, this still takes our nuisance code through municipal court, which unfortunately can sometimes be a long and tedious process before it's even calendared in the municipal court. That has been aggravated by the backlog during COVID, due to the backlog of cases. But basically what this ordinance does is, again, it adds a definition of closing, which means causing properties to be vacated and secured against unauthorized entry. And in addition to the remedies already specified in our nuisance code, it adds abatement closing as a remedy. And one of those remedies, again, is closing. And on the first offense, it states that the court may order the immediate closing of a property to permit abatement through the implementation of the remedies ordered pursuant to subsection E, which again is the subsection just before this that states all of the current remedies. And another item that it adds is someone comes back for a second violation of the nuisance code within 24 months. It states the municipal court shall order that immediate closing of the property to permit abatement through the implementation of remedies ordered pursuant to subsection E. Speaking of the misinformation, one of the items of misinformation that came out of when this was initially in committee was that something happens one time and you get ordered to municipal court and your property is closed. That does not happen. Solicitor Carter can talk more about that in his presentation, but you're not going to get pulled in front of the court for a nuisance unless you have multiple violent felonies occurring on your property, aggravated assaults, homicides, etc. So that is just a quick overview of the changes. And again, these closings cannot be for more than 12 months, given this is a municipality and the municipal court. The judge can order it for less time if he sees fit. So with that, we will move into our presentations on this ordinance and the nuisance code process. And first up, we will have Solicitor Raines Carter from the City Solicitor's Office. Solicitor Carter, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Hillis, Ms. Norwood, Mr. Amos, all members of the committee. I'm Raines Carter, City Solicitor, and thank you for having me here today. I have a brief presentation that I would like to submit, basically outlining our present process, and many thanks to the things that you all did to strengthen the ordinance up to this point. But I am so very happy to see that we are considering moving forward with some additional amendments. If we could advance to the first slide. I don't have. It's not. Okay. Thank you. Okay. The first slide basically just gives a brief outline about our state nuisance laws. We are authorized by the state of Georgia to pursue nuisance under Section 74 of our city ordinances, but it's governed by state law. And of course, nuisances have been around forever, and nuisance enforcement has a very, very deep history in terms of public and private nuisance. A lot of people don't realize, but as a citizen, you can pursue a private nuisance action against someone or an entity that is specifically causing you harm. But what we are talking about today, of course, are public nuisances. Under Section OCGA 4125, this specifically authorizes us in the city of Atlanta and other municipalities to bring these nuisances forward and to order abatement through the court process. If you notice that any city can do this, now if it's an unincorporated area, which is not much in terms of Fulton County, it can be done in a magistrate court. So City of Atlanta, City of South Fulton, other cities are able to avail themselves of this process. Okay. Next slide, please. In the next slide, this is some further amendment to state law. The last sections of amendments by the Georgia legislature actually took place in 2019, and it further defines certain types of offenses or maintenance of property that are nuisance per se. Now, that's a legal term, of course, that means nuisance within itself, which lowers the threshold of what we would have to offer in court, approve in court in terms of a nuisance. But state law only limits it to two different areas. One is where there is sexually related activities such as prostitution, and it basically states that that can be considered a nuisance per se. Now, that's where we can avail ourselves of our other partners. I'm speaking specifically of the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. We have already had an opportunity to meet with them, and we will be meeting with them further. District Attorney Fonnie Willis has designated two people that we have had an opportunity to meet and talk to, and we're going to be having some further meetings with them about pursuing state law violations. The second area is with regard to drug-related activity. And one thing that I want to point out that, and maybe I'll just take a minute and read this one. It says, any owner of real property who has actual knowledge that substantial drug-related activity is being conducted. So as you can see, actual knowledge, that's a higher threshold in terms of proof in court. So we'll be working closely with the District Attorney's Office. There are not specific numbers that are set in code, but I will tell you this, the 2019 amendments that were done in the Georgia's legislature generally talk about around 6 transactions of drug activity. Most of the places that APD have to deal with, quite frankly, that's a small number in terms of what they have to enforce in certain locations. But I did want to make it clear that this is an area where we can bring in partners from other levels of government to work with us with regard to these types of issues. The next page talks about our present process. And as Chairman Hillis says, it is a legal process. There's an investigative part of it. There's case preparation. There's case filing. So you can tell by the tone of my voice, it takes time, doesn't it? It takes time to go through this process. And that's what can be so very frustrating to all of us, including myself. But we have legal rules and statutes that we have to follow. So the present process, what we have been doing the past 2 years, and of course it's been impacted by the pandemic, is getting an identification of these types of distress and problematic properties. And we get recommendations from various city departments, obviously APD, Atlanta Fire Rescue, all of our code enforcement agencies that are based in the city, zoning, DPW, Public Works. We work with Watershed, and we have an opportunity to interact as a collaboration. We've been doing this bi-weekly for almost 2 years now, where we're coming together looking for solutions related to these properties. Once we go through the identification and analysis, and I know you've heard several times from Ms. Smith in previous presentations, she and 2 other members of our staff spend a lot of their time going through police reports, reading a lot of reports of these incidents, looking for underlying crimes, and also going over the code violations that are put forth by code enforcement with APD as to structural violations. So all these things have to come together in an investigative mode Sometimes there are charges that are specifically related to them. Sometimes there could be numerous charges, over 100 charges or more. Sometimes not so many. But taken all together, once we do that and we make a decision that we need to pursue this property, then that's when we get with the Code Enforcement Division and we basically request the title work to see who's the owner of this property. And as many of you know, people take full advantage of our ownership laws to do what? To kind of disguise who is owning where. LLCs, other type of legal structures that are put together where it's hard to get to a name. So part of what we do is we work very closely with the Secretary of State's office to see how people are registered. A lot of times we find that they're improperly registered in terms of doing those things, and so those are state law violations that can be pursued elsewhere. Once we get that information together, then we basically will file a complaint in municipal court that identifies these subjects and interested parties. We get out proper notice, which has to be properly served, to set a hearing before a municipal court judge, no less than 15, no more than 45 days. We also have to run legal notice in the legal organ of the county. For Fulton County, of course, it's the Fulton County Dealer Report, and we have to run that legal notice. Once that legal notice has run, then the action is ripe. And then finally, what do? We finally bring the case forward. We bring the witnesses in. We have testimony. It is a trial. There's direct and cross-examination. And what we are seeking, of course, is a court order for abatement. So that is the legal process. And it can be long, it can be tedious, but the one thing about the legal process is it can be certain, because a judicial pronouncement of a nuisance is recognized in all of the state court records. If you go to the general execution docket over at Fulton County, a legal determination by a judge is always going to be notated in terms of property searches and further actions. So that's the one good thing about it that takes place. Okay?
Solicitor Carter, before you move to your next slide, I want to recognize we've been joined by Councilmember Marcy Overstreet and Councilmember Matt Westmoreland.
Okay. Thank you.
Steve.
Okay. In this next slide, we basically are talking about some of the results of the initiative. And year to date, we've actually officially filed 2 nuisance actions and 2 temporary restraining orders. We have tremendous support from the law department to help us with the restraining orders. We're batting 100 on those, 2 for 2 so far. However, with regard to the properties in municipal court, it's just like any other prosecution. It can rise or fall based upon the evidence. We have been successful in dealing with these listed properties, and as you can see, these that are listed are commercial establishments. But I must add, for purposes of what we're talking about today, we have also been successful with 2 residential complexes. And they're in the news just about every day. And there are always another set of issues that go along with that. So when we bring these actions, we definitely are looking to get a result from the court. So that is our present process. Now, some of the things that we're working on, just to let you know, we have been fortunate to be able to hire 2 additional attorneys that will be working with us in this process. We would like to become much more aggressive. We have these attorneys researching a couple of things for us. One is the state law relative to eminent domain. We have research ongoing on that, how we can tie that into our enforcement process. And the second is, of course, the old standard judicial and REM process that's been around for years. Of course, we know we're going to have county cooperation for that. But what I'm hoping to accomplish with this additional staff is to be able to put a team together that can best serve our city with all the myriad of problems and issues that pop up. As you can see, some of the issues that have popped up involves relocation. It involves school matters. So this is tough business, and we're going to move forward with your guidance and your help to have an impact on our city to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens. And with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'm certainly available for questions.
Thank you, Solicitor Carter. Colleagues, question for the solicitor? Solicitor Carter, on the year-to-date, you filed 10 nuisance complaints and 2 TROs. Are any of those currently active, or have those been adjudicated?
These have been adjudicated. There is another action that will be filed very soon. I don't want to announce it publicly. And there are 2 more that will be filed very soon, but one will be just a matter of days. And what we want to do is, of course, increase our capacity to do this, but at the same time, if we were able to have this legislation come about, there are some really good things in the legislation that I think will be helpful to us. And remember, this is just one of our tools. Another thing that we are anticipating doing is we'd also like to meet with Mr. Buchanan, our new U.S. Attorney, because many of you are aware in the past that we have had federal partnerships. I know Mr. Amos probably remembers the old Weed and Seed. I think we worked on that years ago, where we bring in our federal partners who also have abilities based upon drug transactions, based upon other specific types of crimes, violent crime, to seek some remedies to help us with properties. I do know that at the level of the county, the district attorney's office, I recall a property actually being forfeited. And I think it was over in District 12, where the district attorney's office in the county actually took over the property and got the deed to the property. So there's a way that we can have this all work together. We just need, of course, your help, and of course the leadership and guidance of the mayor and the administration. And they are working feverishly on some things. I've been a part of those meetings, and I'm just happy to have all the partners on board. I'll be meeting with Ms. Hickson later today, and we're going to be discussing some things in furtherance of these efforts that we're making.
Speaking of, I mentioned earlier that correcting some misinformation from our first committee meeting on this. You're not going to find yourself in the municipal court for nuisance action for 1 incident or even 2 incidents. Talk about some of either your closed properties that you've taken action on, or some that you're about to take action on. What type and what number of violent felonies are we talking about before they end up in front of you?
Okay, thank you. Many of these incidents involve homicide. As we go back to page 5, the Encore Hooker Lounge involved the homicide of the security guard that was there for protection. It was such a dangerous situation that it compromised a major tourist attraction, a major established hotel in the city of Atlanta actually had people that would duck under the desks for patrons coming in because of stray bullets. We have had, just to give you an answer to numbers, and I think APD can give me some support on this, the numbers are tremendous. We have calls for service on many of these properties that are well between 1 to 300 calls for service over a period of 12 to 18 months. We also have many incidents of aggravated assault, obviously, as I mentioned before, homicides, robberies, and Connected with this, however, when you get to the residential, then you have the substandard living conditions. And so what happens with our zone calls, and I think APD can more appropriately give you some sense of the numbers, we may have a particular area that's responsible for 40 to 50% of the calls for service from a particular zone. So that can really get to be a problem situation, and people are living there. But even with these businesses, people are just trying to do the things that we do at businesses, to transact business. Many of them, of course, are entertainment venues. And as we can see in the news every day, it's becoming more and more dangerous just to be in a crowd. People are looking for something to happen in a crowd. Kiss Ultra Lounge, which is one of the locations, that was a triple or maybe even a quadruple homicide that took place there. And we actually had people that were part of the plaza that were attacking each other. So we're not talking about soft stuff here. We're talking about where a lot of serious crime is generated. And I can get for you, especially with the Coles properties, the actual statistics that went into the petition in terms of the number of calls for service, the number of incidents. And what we are hoping to be able to do with the help of the district attorney's office is to look specifically at the drug incidents and, of course, sex-related crimes, prostitution, to see if we can do something further to help us. And we're not trying to put people out of business just to put people out of business. We just want to be safe. We want their business to thrive, but it has to be in a safe environment. And if we continue to have these elements of crime to take over, it makes us less safe. It ties into the whole theories that the district attorneys are looking at with gang-related activities. So all of this ties in. You look at a dilapidated building, you say, well, what does that have to do with crime? It has a lot to do with crime. People are doing things there to basically conduct illicit activities. We had a property a couple of years ago. They made a video there with automatic weapons. And so it's not part of this list, but we were successful in closing that property also.
Two questions, and I'll defer to see if my colleagues have any. Two more questions. One is, I guess, somewhat moving away from commercial properties, although it happens there as well. But I'm thinking about drug houses. One in particular in my district, APD has busted that house multiple times, directly across the street from a park. There have been drive-by shootings. But we're doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. You brought up the ability of DA Willis to seize these properties, which I don't believe, maybe we do, maybe we don't have in the municipal court. But can you talk a little bit more about how we are or we're not doing that, and how we're going to engage with DA Willis to hopefully bump up that program to go after some of these repeat offending drug houses?
Absolutely. We don't have that legal ability at the city level with regard to the forfeiture type of thing, but the district attorney does. Just to give you an idea, we were able to meet last week before the holiday with two representatives from her office specifically about these violations that are on the slide. And what we would like to put together as part of our collaborative is to have a section that deals specifically with that, with representatives from our office, the district attorney's office, certainly the law department can be involved, to look at the drug houses. We, for example, have two houses that are on our radar now, one from your district and one from District 5. And I won't disclose, but we are in the investigative stages on those two properties, and we're going to be asking for the assistance of the district attorney's office to look toward enforcement under these specific violations.
And the last question, I don't think you brought it up here, but in previous committee meetings, et cetera, I guess we call it your watch list, is quite long, but I believe we heard there's only one or so you're about to file. So what, I mean, I'm not asking you to get into specifics of, these cases on the watch list, but I mean, what makes Solicitor Carter wake up one morning and say, hey, we're going to move this property from the watch list, or we're going to finally take action on it, and what do you need from us to help you ramp up those efforts?
There are combinations of factors that deal with violent activity, drugs, illicit sexual activity, but also the conditions and the impact on the community. To give you an example, we've had a couple of properties that were on our list last year that have actually dropped off the list with no action. Why? Because APD was able to enforce, council members were able to bring attention to the properties, and so you may not be hearing about that property anymore. Now, that probably doesn't help you because you probably got 10 calls with new properties, but you don't hear about that property anymore because we were able to alleviate the situation without even bringing it forward to court. Sometimes just the focus and the attention makes all the difference in the world. And so that's why the list, so to speak, is a working list. It's ever evolving. Some people actually drop off. These people here that we went forward on, these were the bad actors. These are the people that after you notify them, hey, don't know, don't care. And they just persisted on do this. So some of these situations actually are able to resolve for the better just by you sending us information. So that's how you all can help. Continue with our office, with APD, and we'll find a conduit with our partners in the DA's office that we'll hand out to you to focus that information. And the minute we start the process, if it's the type of property owner that cares, that does not want their reputation out there, then that goes away. But the bad actors, they don't care, so we're going to continue to pursue them.
Yeah, and that's definitely what we want. We want to be able to help the people that actually want help, but those ultra bad actors, if they're not here to cooperate and work together with us, work together with APD, your office, et cetera, to better their properties or their businesses, then this is the route we have to take. Colleagues, questions for Mr. Carter? Councilman Overstreet.
So thank you, Solicitor Carter, for being here today. I know that as a council member and all of my colleagues, we've done quite a few innovative pieces of legislation lately to try to preserve our quality of life. And I am hoping that going forward, we'll be able to actually implement and enforce all of the efforts. So it is good to see that we have made some headway. I was looking at this list that you provided to us. And, we have so many different bad actors across the city that it's hard to pull out just 6 of them here. So from your conversation, I'm glad that you're acknowledging that we have way more than just this of properties that have been nuisances that we're tending to and that we're closing, telling us how the properties are actually falling off of the list. But I do feel like I can think of 5 things in just 2020 that we've done to try to make sure that we're attacking the nuisance properties. And I'm hoping that we will start to see more of the efforts, more fruits from the efforts, especially with these blighted properties. our quality of life in Atlanta, we have to really capitalize on the things that we actually do have control over. On these random shootings and the reasons why they're happening. Those are some things that we may not be able to get ahead of at this moment, but there are some things that I do feel like we absolutely have control over, and that is taking care of the people that we know are not doing the right thing by the city. So to me, when I look at this, the nuisance legislation and how we're trying to change our in-rim boards and our in-rim processes and partnering with county and federal officials, I just am hoping that sooner or later we will see a huge difference, because these are some things I do feel like we absolutely have control over. So thank you for coming to make sure that we're on the same page in our partnerships, from your office to ours. I know I'm definitely ready to help you any kind of way that I can to make sure that your job is easier and certainly more more efficient, so that we can, because what's happening is people are thinking that we're not doing all that we can, especially when they see a building boarded up for 5 years, and they're noticing that I know before Club Deja Vu closed, and there was an actual death in the parking lot, people had been calling me on Sunday afternoons saying that people were there at 6 in the morning, and that happened for at least a year, it felt like, before we start seeing a real difference. And so some of our constituents are feeling like we're not doing all that we can, and that's why, as a council, I do believe that we made it a priority to put all of our ordinances and efforts in place so that we could give you and the police officers and everyone the tools that they need, as well as our customers. I think that the good actors, the business owners, are our customers. Are visualized and actualized by our constituents, because your office is extremely important to this work, making sure that our quality of life is better. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Your comments are very much appreciated. We feel blessed in the sense that we have a mayor and a council that are laser focused on alleviating these problems. My colleagues in other jurisdictions, everybody doesn't have that benefit. I talk to other prosecutors monthly in other cities in Georgia and across the United States, and everybody doesn't have the benefit of the administration, the mayor, and the council all being on the same page. What I am hoping for FY23, with the resources that we've been provided, the additional attorneys, that we can work very hard to make this a real banner year to start striking at this. I think that the efforts that are coming forth with this legislation to give us some additional tools will help, but we've got to get our county partners on board. I'm going to reach out to get our federal partners on board, and we've got to look for ways to accelerate certain parts of the process that we can accelerate, but also to be effective with those parts of the process that by law we can't accelerate, but we still want a positive result so that we can make our city safer and more livable. So I appreciate it.
Any other questions, comments for the solicitor? Ramus.
Thanks, Solicitor Raines. I'm glad to see step 2 in the process, to where we know that there is a process to where people end up on the list. I heard you say that people often end up falling off the list without any type of process filed or anything. This paper came out, and when it came out, some kind of way, people were saying it was targeted toward the nightlife community. Say I'm a club owner. Say I unfortunately make it past the process. I end up on your list. How do I get off your list at that point?
What happens is voluntary compliance. Generally, with specific types of violations, there's generally a notice first that comes from our enforcement agencies, be it the code enforcement section, some other divisions of APD. Those people that comply within the specified time, I have no bone to pick with you. It's those people that don't care. And what complicates this process for us all, and it frustrates us all, including me, is the absentee people, the absentee owners who are, on the beach somewhere, and people are suffering, and they have all of these devices that they've put in place using the legal process to avoid liability. Well, our job, with your help, is to get at that portion of these bad actors, to do what they used to tell us in law school, pierce the corporate veil, to find a way to get through that. And that's why these types of legislative proposals, I think, will be helpful to us. We're not targeting nightclubs. We're not targeting people who want to responsibly rent their property and to maintain it. Have no bone to pick, but we know what we're facing with people that are profiting and that are causing misery and causing danger.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Solicitor Carter.
Okay, thank you.
Now have the Atlanta Police Department come up, talk about their side of this, and then we were specifically asking about updates to the off-duty officer policy.
So good morning. Good morning, Chairman Hillis and distinguished members of City Council. My name is Captain Jeff Baxter with the Atlanta Police Department. I'm currently assigned to our Code Enforcement Section. With me here to my right is Lieutenant Mark Cotter, and he is the commander of our License and Permits Unit. So first, let me start off by saying, as a police department, we are committed to dealing with these clubs, restaurants, bars that operate outside the lines. We understand that there is a direct nexus between our violent crime and these clubs, bars, restaurants that operate outside the lines. And we are committed to continue to do all we can on the enforcement piece to make sure that there's resolution when it comes to that. And just to give you some background information, if we go back to 2009, there were 873 alcohol permits issued in the city of Atlanta. Those are establishments that were allowed to sell alcohol here in the city, and that was in 2009, 873. If we fast forward to today, that number is 2,211, right? So we have over 2,000 locations in the city of Atlanta that can sell alcohol. And if you look at those numbers, it's a lot, right? So we've grown as a city, we've grown, in our commercial space all over, right? So it's up to us to make sure that appropriate action is taken when specific establishments operate outside the lines. And when it comes to that enforcement piece, that's where our License and Permits Unit within APD is tasked to tackle that. And I need to make sure that I acknowledge Chief Judge Carter Erica Smith, who's not here today, and members of the law department, as we all work hand in hand in addressing this issue. I will tell you that I want to thank you for introducing this legislation. When we look at the padlock law that they have in Baltimore, I think it's a great thing, and I think it's something that could be effective here in the city, and we certainly welcome that. The way it works with us is that, you know, through our enforcement efforts, which are our undercover operations, our search warrants, our arrest warrants, combing through all the 911 calls, all of that comes together in providing that information to the city solicitor's office and vetting through our law department to hold these clubs and bars to task. So any legislation that will help us go from gathering all this information to get us to a nuisance action, if we're able to gather all this evidence and the hard work that these individuals do, if we can get that to abatement and closing, that would be a great thing. So if we're looking at 3 strikes, that's great, as opposed to the quagmire or the bog down that we get into where we put all this work together to try to get to a nuisance action. So I thank you for introducing this legislation. I think it'll benefit the police department. And Councilmember Amos, to answer your question earlier, you talked about, and again, this isn't trying to target nightlife or target nightclubs. You know, what can these nightclubs do in order to not end up on the list or not end up on our radar? You know, the mayor launched an initiative with the mayor's office of nighttime entertainment that launched several months ago, and I can tell you that they've already been out there at night going to these clubs and doing voluntary compliance checks to see what's going on there, writing up recommendations and providing that to these club owners to say, hey, we came out, we took a look around, this is what we found, we're giving it to you. And these are some of the things that you might need to tighten up on or look at in terms of what's going on. You know, so that's one area. But I will say that I want to commend Lieutenant Cotter here. Lieutenant Cotter has led the charge. You know, that list that Chief Judge Carter put up with those different clubs, all those clubs on that list, all the clubs that are dealt with, that all comes from, again, the License and Permits Unit, conducting undercover operations, getting search warrants, going in these clubs, and gathering that information that is then shared to be able to take further prosecution against these clubs. So with that being said, we welcome this legislation. We think it'll go a long way in helping us, and we thank you for that. Any questions that I can answer on behalf of the police department?
And Captain Baxter, what section are you over particularly?
So I'm in the code enforcement section, and that is with Director Talley. Daphne Talley is our director, and I'm also assigned there to the code enforcement section.
And so having L&P under code enforcement, that was a recent change?
So the License and Permits Unit has always kind of been under that umbrella. So it's always been there under that umbrella. So yeah, you have license and permits under the general umbrella of code enforcement.
And Lieutenant Cotter, how many staff, whether sworn or non-sworn, do you have in L&P?
Well, good morning.
Morning.
We have a total of 16 employees, 1 lieutenant and 2 sergeants, 5 investigators, 3 officers, and I believe 5 civilians. I believe that adds up to 16.
Heard of my colleagues, Councilmember Overstreet.
Thank you so much for coming here today. Just a question. So this legislation is a blanket over the city, you know, for the nuisance activity. However, our off-duty cops are not allowed to have extra jobs on the scene of our nightlife or our adult entertainment the strip clubs. And so therefore, this particular legislation is not fair to that sector because we're holding them to a different standard that's not for every other night establishment. So what are our options as a city to make sure that the strip clubs or our nightlife, adult entertainment, can have blue lights in their parking lots? That's all they're asking for.
And so they don't get in trouble. The man that is going to answer that just walked in the room.
Oh, good.
Had an error on his calendar, so
I didn't even see him walk in.
Interim Chief Sherbaum will be glad to address that for us.
Absolutely.
Mr.
Hello,
Chair,
Chief. Thank you for being here.
And if I could, it's not only strip clubs, it's actually a directive by the commander if they approve whatever extra job the officer is applying for. So it may not only be strip clubs, it may be other entertainment and other nightlife establishments that commander may not approve that officer to work at.
Okay, but right this moment, I think that they're the only ones, the actual strip clubs are the only ones that are being, that can't be approved, right?
Councilmember Overstreet, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for coming.
Chairman Hillis, members of the committee, staff, guest. If I can enjoy that conversation, I know previously the administration had asked us to review our policies on extra job, where individuals can work at, and how we regulate those. We do have an outlier in that adult entertainment establishments cannot hire Atlanta police officers at this time, nor can they hire Georgia State Patrol nor Fulton County Sheriff, because those two entities as well have a prohibition. We are committed to smart crime fighting, and we are committed to ensuring that we maintain the public trust, because we never want to strain the public's trust by where we capture jobs. The team was tasked with reviewing law enforcement agencies across the country that do allow officers to work there, and also putting our own safeguards in. So my intent is that if this ordinance is passed, if it proceeds, that we will be amending our policies to allow officers to work at these establishments under safeguards that we will have in place to make sure we're doing our part to ensure that everyone that will be regulated by this legislation has the same playing field and the access to Atlanta police officers to ensure a safe establishment. There will be certain safeguards in place that we will have, but it is our intent to accompany this legislation with a policy change to make sure that this police department is doing its part for a safe city.
Well, that's good information. That's really good information, because a safe and fair playing field is the most important thing for us to have for all of our customers. And earlier I explained that our customers really are our entertainment and all of our businesses that are licensed with the city. They're our customers. So I'm glad to hear that. So you're saying that legislation it'll be a companion piece. It'll accompany and be available on Monday?
No, ma'am. This will be a policy change, right? We're going to follow the progress of this legislation. This legislation proceeds and goes into effect. We will ensure that we adopt our policies at the same time.
Okay.
So to occur with that.
Okay. Can you make sure that we have that ahead of time so that I can look over it before this is actually ratified?
Certainly. At the appropriate time, we'll provide that to everyone. All of our policies, except a few, are online anyway. If you go to our website, you can look at all of our policies, and we'll ensure that this body has an access to that as well prior to be posting.
Okay, so everyone will have a level playing field. Well, Chair Hillis, that's great news. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Chief, one thing I wanted to bring up, and Councilmember Vice Chair Amos kind of touched on it, is outside of adult entertainment establishments, there are sometimes clubs, et cetera, that off-duty officers aren't allowed to work there because of issues, usually a level of violence. But for years, it's been said that, how can I understand our need to keep our police officers safe, but how are we allowing a business that rises to that level of violence where you, previous chiefs, commanders, et cetera, don't feel safe sending your officers there, but it's okay for that business to stay open and have unarmed civilians, trying to enjoy the nightlife when such a level of violence exists? And how do you see yourself working? One, are there any establishments that you know of that currently our commanders or your executive staff don't feel safe working? And two, what are you doing as a police department when you have that, I guess, feeling? How are you working with our solicitor or DA to shut those businesses down? Because if they're not safe enough for our police officers, they're certainly not safe enough for our citizens and the visitors of our city.
Chairman Hillis, I don't think it would be accurate to say that they become unsafe and therefore we don't feel it's safe to be there. We would say the ownership of the property is not doing their part to abide by the laws of the city, and the presence of an Atlanta police officer could be construed to say that we endorse that activity. So we may revoke an individual's ability to hire Atlanta police officers because of cases we have placed before the municipal court or cases that we have placed before the License Review Board, and we know they're working through, and we believe that we stand behind those accusations we placed before those two judicial bodies, and therefore we do not believe it's appropriate for our officers to be there, and it appears that we're condoning that activity. So it's not necessarily a safety issue. It is the fact that this department has made a charge, or we believe we can substantiate conduct, and we are waiting for those two bodies I just mentioned to act. As you know, absent this legislation, we only have the ability to accuse, and we only have the ability to arrest, and we must depend on others to actually stop the business from operating.
Questions, colleagues, comments? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the
Very
committee.
much. Right. We had quite a bit of discussion during the presentations. I don't know if anyone else, my colleagues, would like to add anything. If not, we can move to public comment. All right. We'll move to public comment. If there's any other discussion, we can have that after the public comment if anything comes up. I do have our public comment sheet. I only have 3 people signed up. First is Jim Durrett.
Chairman Hillis, members of council and committee. My name is Jim Durrett. For close to 3 years, the Buckhead CID and the Buckhead Coalition, the 2 organizations that I have the privilege of leading, have had public safety at the top of our priority lists. It's why we have been investing hundreds of thousands of dollars to support the Atlanta Police Department through the Buckhead Security Plan and earlier initiatives. One aspect of the plan that we have funded is supplemental police patrols targeting some of the areas in Buckhead where properties housing restaurants, bars, or clubs have been the source of brazen, inconsiderate, lawless behavior. Late night noise, traffic snarls, and violence have led to extreme anxiety in our community that we serve. In some cases, landlords and neighbors have been threatened with retaliation by the owners and operators of the nuisance establishments for speaking up about the intolerable nuisance behavior. Abuse of alcohol permits has been pervasive, and we, along with our partners at APD, have been frustrated in our efforts to get establishments to play by the rules and for punishment to actually curtail abuse. In addition, all kinds of site improvements, such as paving for additional parking and construction of outdoor spaces, have been undertaken by establishments without getting the requisite permits. It seems the rules just don't seem to apply to many of these bad actors. Privilege is interpreted and treated as right. We fully support your efforts to address this critical problem in Buckhead and other communities throughout Atlanta. Thank you.
Next is Garth Peters. Say that again.
This is direct conveyed sufficiently.
Okay. All right. Daryl Johnson.
Good morning, Council.
Morning.
Hey, I'm glad to be here this morning. Again, I shared with you at the last committee meeting about our participation with you all on public safety issues in the 04th Ward, and I want to reaffirm that you have our support when it comes to public safety, mainly because criminality is bad for business. We have 78 active business members of the 04th Ward Business Association. I deal with all 78 as one human being, and 04th Ward is a very large area, right? 4 separate quadrants, 4 separate issues, but public safety at the top of all of those issues. I sat with APD recently, not Chief Sherrod, but the rest of all of them, Major Zone 5, Zone 6, talked about the Pledge of Public Safety and how we would collaborate from the business side with the council and APD. So I'm looking for support with that. Okay, we talked about it last time. I'm back here talking about it again. We're here to provide support from the good actors, the good businesses of 04th Ward, and for the intent of preserving the small business community that you know 04th Ward is. Okay, I also provided Councilmember Waits with some amendment legislative. I sat there and I looked up, I Googled how to do legislative and wrote it up for you all, provided that just so that it's holistic in its approach. So it's not just from the criminal side, but from the good business side, that we're not getting caught in the web of certain situations that's not, everyone's behavior. So I just wanted to share, you have our support on behalf of the 04th Ward Business Association. Reach out if you need us.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All right, that concludes our public commenters. We have one more. If you come up and announce your name, you have 2 minutes.
First, I want to apologize for my tardiness to this body. My name is Johnny Mims. I'm the president of the MLK Merchant Association and also a property and business owner in Atlanta. One of the things that we are facing on the corridor of ML King is we're basically held hostage by the undesirables, all the gangs and the drug dealers, and so our businesses can't thrive because of the presence that they have, the looming presence that they have, and it sets our businesses up to be put in the nuisance category, which also we have another element of the people that are trying to buy out all the properties in that area. And so when you get deemed a nuisance and then those entities get to jump down, swoop down, and pretty much buy you out, take your property and whatever it is that you have worked hard for or trying to work to obtain, and they get a chance to jump right in because you have been deemed a nuisance, but it's out of your hands because you don't have the ability to hire these officers that are some of them not able to work at your establishment, or we just can't afford $60 an hour for these small businesses. So it's kind of putting them in a crush situation, and it's a concern for most of these businesses in that community. And some of them are being targeted, their customers are being targeted as soon as they see the crowd. These gangs have organized, and so they'll go around and target these customers of these businesses. Several of them are suffering because of that, and then they might wind up on that list that they had no way to pretty much fight their way out of it. So it's pretty much boxing them in. So I'm just asking that you would consider this as well. Thank you.
Thank you.